Good morning and welcome to the Morning Endurance Call. I'm Keith Erwood of the Erwood Group. Today I'm getting started a little bit early and I want to discuss. So yesterday I had major glitches in trying to get the stream software working, and that's been corrected today. And we started quite a bit late yesterday and ran through the stream, but then realized it didn't actually broadcast the Morning Endurance Call. So today I'm going to redo what should have been yesterday's message and then carry on from there. So without further ado, good morning and welcome to the Morning Endurance Call. This is your daily 15-minute leadership ritual focused on preparedness, leadership, and disciplined business thinking. Each weekday morning, we spend a few minutes talking about what it really takes to build stronger businesses, stronger decision making, and stronger leadership in a world where disruption is no longer rare. Today's topic is this: what executives often get wrong about IT disaster recovery. This matters because many executives understand that technology is important, but what they also do not always understand what true recoverability actually requires. And that gap can be expensive. A lot of leadership teams assume that if a company has backups, a cloud provider, disaster recovery plan, high availability, or an IT team that sounds confident, then the organization is probably in good shape. But those things alone do not guarantee recoverability. And that is the key point. Because IT disaster recovery is not just about whether data exists somewhere else. It is not just about whether a system can be restored eventually. And it is not just about whether technology teams have documented procedures. Real IT disaster recovery is about whether critical technology services can be restored in a way that supports actual business recovery within acceptable timeframes and with acceptable levels of integrity, access, and usability. That is a much higher standard, and this is where executives often get things wrong. Not because they do not care, but because they are often working from assumptions that sound reasonable on the surface and turn out to be much weaker in reality. So today, I want to walk through some of the most common misunderstandings. And first, executives often confuse backups with disaster recovery. Backups matter, they are important, but backups are not the same as recovery. A backup may mean that the data exists somewhere, but disaster recovery asks much bigger questions. Can the right systems be restored in the right order, with the right dependencies, and within the required time frame, with the right level of data integrity, with the right access controls, and in a way that allows the business to actually resume critical operations? That is not the same thing as saying, yes, we have backups. A business can have backups and still be poorly prepared for real recovery. Second, executives often assume technical recovery equals business recovery. This is a big one. A server might be restored, an application might come back online, a database might be available, but can people log in? Can they trust the data? Are the integrations working? And are downstream dependencies available? Are the business workflows usable? And can customers actually be served? A system that is technically online but practically unusable has not solved the business problem. And that distinction matters a great deal. And third, executives often underestimate recovery complexities. They may hear phrases like failover, replication, restore, high availability, or cloud recovery and assume those words translate into real-world readiness. But in practice, recovery is often more complex than leadership realizes. Why is that? Because critical systems depend on other systems, such as applications depend on identity, processes depend on data accuracy, users depend on connectivity, recovery depends on sequencing, and business usefulness depends on more than infrastructure status. That is why one restored component does not necessarily mean real recoverability exists. And fourth, executives often believe recovery time objectives are more credible than they actually are. A business may say it has a 4-hour or 8-hour recovery objective, and that may sound reassuring, but the real question is, has that target been validated? For instance, what is your recovery time actual for the IT processes to become recovered? Not admired, not assumed, validated. Can it actually be done under realistic conditions? Has it been tested? Do people involved know their roles? Are the runbooks current? Are access paths ready? Do dependencies align with that expectation? Has the business ever observed whether recovery can happen the way that it practiced? If not, then the stated target may be more of an aspiration than a capability, and that is a dangerous gap. And fifth, executives often overlook access and identity as a recovery issue. This is one of the most common blind spots in ITDR. A system can be recovered, but if the right people do not have the right access, the business still has a problem. If break glass accounts do not work, if privileged access is unclear, if authentication paths are broken, and if key administrative access depends on unavailable systems, or if no one can get to what they need when time matters most, recovery slows down immediately. Access readiness is recovery readiness, and that is a point leaders often miss. And sixth, executives often assume vendors and cloud providers eliminate the need for internal recovery thinking. That is absolutely not true. Cloud services can absolutely improve resilience and options. Vendors can provide strong capabilities, but outsourcing technology does not outsource accountability. The business still needs to understand what the provider is responsible for, what the company is still responsible for, what recovery assumptions are being made, and what service dependencies exist, how business operations are affected during a vendor disruption, and what the organization will do if the provider is unavailable, degraded, or slower than expected. A vendor relationship is not a substitute for internal preparedness. Now, I want to make an important point here. None of this means executives need to become technologists. That is not the expectation. But they do need to ask better questions. Because leadership assumptions shape business exposure. If executives assume the organization is more recoverable than it really is, the business will likely be underprepare, underinvest, and underappreciate how fragile some of its critical technology dependencies truly are. That is why strong executive oversight matters, and the right leadership questions are often things like this. What are our truly critical systems? And what business functions do they support? What are the realistic recovery timeframes, your RTAs? What actually has been tested? What dependencies could slow recovery down? What access issues could create delays? And what is our confidence based on? Evidence or assumption? Where is the gap between business expectation and technical reality? Those are much better questions than, do we have a DR plan? Because the existence of a plan is not the real issue. The real issue is whether the organization can recover in a way that protects the business. And this connects very closely to business consequences. IT disaster recovery should never be treated as just an infrastructure topic. It should be tied directly to the following: critical functions, maximum tolerable downtime, financial consequences, customer impacts, and dependency chains, as well as executive decision making. That is what makes ITDR strategically useful. Otherwise, it remains too isolated from the business, and this connects directly to endurance. Because endurance in business is the ability to continue operating, make sound decisions, recover intelligently, and keep moving forward under pressure over time. IT disaster recovery supports endurance when the organization can actually restore critical technology capability in a way that aligns with the business that it truly needs. Not just technically, operationally, strategically, and realistically. If executives misunderstand ITDR, the business may appear more prepared than it really is. But when executives understand what real recoverability requires, leadership becomes stronger. Questions become sharper, investments become more disciplined, and testing becomes more meaningful. Assumptions become more visible, and the business becomes less fragile. That is the real value. Now let's make this practical. If you're a business leader, here's one of the best questions you can ask your IT and recovery teams. If one of our most critical systems failed today, what would recovery actually look like for the business, not just for the infrastructure? That is a powerful question because it shifts the conversation from technical comfort to business reality. Let's look at some things you can ask. What has been tested recently? What did we learn? Where are we still exposed? What recovery assumptions are least proven? And what dependencies could delay recovery even if the system comes back online? How would we know recovery was truly successful from a business perspective? Those questions improve executive oversight dramatically. And that is what leadership should bring to ITDR. Leadership should not bring technical micromanagement, but strategic clarity. So here is today's leadership takeaway. Executives often get IT disaster recovery wrong when they mistake backups, technical restoration, or documented plans for true business recoverability. That is the point. So here's today's question for you. If one of your most critical systems went down today, would leadership know the difference between technical recovery and real business recovery? That is a serious question. Because the difference often determines whether the organization recovers with confidence or with confusion. So thank you for taking the time to join me today on the Morning Endurance Call. If this is the kind of thinking and you find it useful to you, join our free endurance community. And that is where I'm sharing additional tools, resources, live learnings, and ongoing conversations for business owners, executives, and practitioners who want to build stronger businesses through preparedness, leadership, and endurance. The link will be below in the description. Tomorrow, I'm going to talk about why backups alone are not a recovery strategy, because storing data is not the same as restoring business capability. Until then, think clearly, prepare deliberately, lead with endurance. Thanks for joining. Bye now.